best selection of 3 books that we're doing in a long time, so really good stuff. All right. Today, our book of choice is Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Our reviewer today is Julia Garver, and she's lived in Genesee County for the past 21 years, grew up in Erie County in a home built by her great-grandparents on 50 acres of mostly wooded land that is part of 18 Mile Creek watershed. There she learned to appreciate many gifts from Mother Earth. Her family grew and preserved most of their produce, tapped maple trees and made syrup, and celebrated the arrival of spring by harvesting wild leeks and making leek and potato soup. And of course, we don't forget, it's over there.
If you can't
Feel free.
smell it.
You're not taking it home. These are lessons Julia continues to value and tries to practice through her work as a master gardener and as a volunteer with Acorns, the Genesee County Friends of the Park organization. She is a 2010 graduate of Leadership Genesee and a retired attorney, and currently teaches group exercise classes at the Batavia YMCA. And Julia, take it away.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, a little bit. First I wanted to ask, how many people have read the book?
In process.
In process. Part of it, okay. All right. I read it a few years ago. Actually, I listened to it. Did anyone listen to it? Yeah, she reads it. The author reads it. And it was funny, I was re-listening to parts of it earlier this week. My husband was in the car and he said, wow, she has a very soothing voice. And it is. People have described her work as grounded, calming, and I think, well, then he said, I could go to sleep to this. But I think it's always interesting to hear the author's voice. So Robin Wall Kimmerer is quite an accomplished woman. She was born in 1953, and she is currently an American Distinguished Teaching Professor of Environmental and Forest Biology and the Director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment at SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse. So she was actually raised in upstate New York. A little bit of her background, which really comes to the forefront in this book and informs her interest in indigenous cultures. Her paternal grandfather was one of those unfortunate children who was part of the Indian federal, policies of Indian removal, and was sent to the Carlisle Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania from Oklahoma. He was actually sent there with his brother, but his brother escaped and went back to Oklahoma. The original her original ancestors were part of the Potawatomi tribe, which was located in the Lake Michigan, Wisconsin area, and they were removed from there a couple times and ended up in Oklahoma. So there are some stories she tells about her childhood experiences, her grandfather's childhood experiences that kind of revolve around that. But ultimately, her father stayed, and whatever happened with the kids, if you age out or graduate or whatever, and felt so disconnected from both, his ancestral life as well as what they were trying to change him into. He ended up serving in the military for a number of years, and then ended up in upstate New York. It's not really clear what brought him there, but that's how she ended up in upstate New York. So she she describes in one chapter the situation where she's looking to make a situation or a decision in her education. Her parents were very interested in preserving the indigenous ancestry, and they did a lot of background research themselves. They ended up going back to Potawatomi gatherings, let's say, to learn more about the culture and so on and so forth. So they were very, she and her sisters grew up learning indigenous wisdom, let's say, revolving around plants, and I think that it really, all that background informs a lot of the themes and issues of concern, of her concern, that are reflected in this book. But when she's trying to decide which direction is she going to go, she loves writing, she loves poetry, but she's also really interested in plants, and has to make a decision, what am I going to pursue? So she ends up going to school. She went to ESF, where she teaches now, for her bachelor's in botany, which she got in 1975. She worked for 2 years for B&L as a microbiologist, and then moved to Wisconsin, where she did her master's and PhD work at Madison. Her focus, has anyone read her other book, Gathering Mosses? Her focus in her dissertation was mosses. I have, and I'm just going to say, if you have a choice, read this one. This one does, I really enjoy that she brings in indigenous wisdom, mythology, and she gives you scientific information, scientific names, and so forth. She kind of blends everything together in a nice way. The Moss book is more towards the scientific end of things. In any case, she got married, and she ended up moving with her husband to Kentucky, where she did her first teaching, and she has a couple of stories about teaching students from the Bible Belt some science-based information, which was kind of a challenge for her. I found the stories somewhat amusing. They asked her whether her interest in science, in mosses, in plants and so forth, was her religion, because that's, where they were coming from. And she didn't want to get in trouble, so she kind of avoided the answer to that, which in this book she reflects. I should have said yes in retrospect. So the courses she's teaching at ESF now, and she teaches courses on land and culture, traditional ecological knowledge, ethnobotany, ecology of mosses, disturbance ecology, and general botany. She also she was co-founder of this Center for Native Peoples and the Environment, and in that it is looking to advance the concept of what's called traditional ecological knowledge, shortened to TEC. I read an article from the New York Times Magazine of February of this year. So when, this book was written 10 years ago. It's kind of amazing that it's been that long, but here we are 10 years later, and I found out that if the reporter is to be believed, but in In December, the White House Council on Environmental Quality and the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy jointly released government-wide, quote, guidelines for recognizing and implementing indigenous knowledge in federal research, policy, and decision-making.
Yes.
Which, you know, it took 10 years, but people are listening, and it's really kind of a groundswell movement, I feel. A plant swell. So that's a little bit about the author. This is how she describes herself, which I think is wonderful. I do have to say that, you know, when I described her voice, her tone, when she speaks it almost, you feel like she's got a smile on her face. She's just a very kind of positive, and I think in this book, that's the ultimate end result. There are a lot of very disturbing stories about what we as people have done in a destructive way to Mother Earth, but she I think has taken this stance that we need to heal our broken relationship with the earth, and I think we need to do that using Western science, but guided by indigenous principles of respect, responsibility, and reciprocity. So these are all themes that come up throughout the book. They come forth in different stories. This really is kind of like a collection of stories. And in these stories, she weaves together the indigenous knowledge and mythology with her personal experiences and her scientific knowledge. And it's a wonderful way, I think, of conveying information. So braiding sweetgrass. Sweetgrass is Hierochloe odorata. So the Latin translation to that apparently is holy fragrant grass. So sacred grass to a number of native people. Now, I have spent time in the Low Country, the Carolinas, where I know sweetgrass baskets are sold, and I was thinking to myself as she's describing the growing conditions for her sweetgrass, I was thinking that can't be the same thing, and it's not. It's still called sweetgrass, but it's a different grass entirely, totally different species, just to clear that up.
Master gardeners.
Pardon me?
Is that for the
For all
master?
you master gardeners. Well, I was confused. So she says that the concept of braiding using three strands, and I think this number 3 comes up in a number of different stories and myths, if you want to call them that. Excuse me. But and here she's saying that in this collection of stories, she's weaving a braid that's combining indigenous knowledge with Western science, and then her personal stories. So it's, in her words, the intertwining of science, spirit, and story. And I think, again, these are themes that come up again and again. But I think what she's doing is taking these concepts of science, spirit, and story and moving them to the theme of respect, responsibility, and reciprocity. And I had to think, in looking at this concept and thinking about our future and the way we educate our children, that maybe we need to integrate these 3 R's with the other 3 R's and get our children to think about our relationship with the land, and to listen to plants, to appreciate Mother Earth at an early age. That's my 2 cents. There are my leaks. Okay, so a synopsis of the book is really, I've said this, that she uses the sacred plant sweetgrass as a metaphor, and she is braiding together these stories of what is called TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, with Western science and also the lessons of plants. And she's exploring the reciprocal relationships of plant, animal, and human life on Mother Earth. And addresses the loss of that reciprocity on our part, humankind's part. She says, you know, our relationship to the land is broken, but she wants to provide these stories as almost as healing medicine, as a way that we can consider to look forward and try and mend our relationship with the land. There are a number of devastating situations that she talks about. You know, strip mining, the Onondaga Lake situation. There are a number of them, but I think that the conclusion, my takeaway from the book is she ends by, she asks the question, you know, what if this is going to be a reciprocal relationship that humankind has with nature, with Mother Earth, we have to appreciate more the gifts we're getting from Mother Earth, and then we have to be willing to give back. So she asks the question numerous times, what can we give back? What is our reciprocity in this relationship? Because Mother Earth has given us much. So she breaks this book up into 5 sections: planting sweetgrass, tending sweetgrass, picking sweetgrass, braiding sweetgrass, and burning sweetgrass. And each of these has significance. Each of these actions has significance in the indigenous culture, and she tells you about that at the beginning of each of these sections. So I think section 1, planting sweetgrass, is where she really weaves these 3 braids together and develops what I would call philosophical questions to introduce concepts of reciprocity, gratitude, what she calls gift economy versus market economy, the spirit of community, learning from plants, and granting non-humans personhood. So a little bit on each of those. She starts telling about the creation story, and I'm sure, living where we do, many of you have heard about this from the Haudenosaunee standpoint, and Sky Woman coming down to Earth, and the birds and animals and fish helping her, and ultimately she ends up on the back of the turtle. Earth is called Turtle Island, and the muskrat brings mud up for her. She has come down with seeds, plants the seeds. The first thing to grow is sweetgrass. So that's one reason why it is held sacred in indigenous culture. So she says on page 8, from the very beginning of the world, the other species were a lifeboat for the people. Now we must be theirs. That's sort of the introduction of the whole concept of this book. Plants obviously play an important part of, in her life, in the indigenous culture, but she says, I'm just going to read a section here. In the Western tradition, there is a recognized hierarchy of beings with, of course, the human being on the top, the pinnacle of evolution, the darling of creation, and plants at the bottom. But in native ways of knowing, human people are often referred to as the, quote, younger brothers of creation. We say that humans have the least experience with how to live and thus the most to learn. We must look to our teachers among the other species for guidance. Their wisdom is apparent in the way that they live. They teach by example. They've been on the earth far longer than we have and have had time to figure things out. And this idea comes up several times in additional stories further along in the book, but in one way she frames it is plants adapt to changes, people observe that adaptation, and they adopt those changes. So, we have been and do learn from plants if we stop to think. There's a chapter called Council of Pecans, and she talks about what pecan trees do, which is called massed fruiting. So if conditions are right, and we're still trying to determine what right is, the trees all fruit together. And it's not like they're in necessarily the same environment or habitat. There's some messaging going on where they decide they're all going to produce nuts this year. There's some theories as to how that happens, why that happens, but what she is demonstrating with this piece, this story, is that what's good for one is good for all, and there's power in unity and power in community. And just as an aside, there's a wonderful book which goes a little further along explaining on how they do communicate. It's called Finding the Mother Tree. Fantastic book, by Suzanne Simard. In this first section, she also talks about the, as I said, gift economy, which is a different concept than a market economy. So the gift economy is the idea that you are reciprocating, you are expressing gratitude, you have a responsibility that's associated with whatever action you take, versus the market economy, which we know with our currency and it's all about profits and progress and rights versus responsibilities. That land is mine. I have the right to do with it what I want. And one of the there's several very powerful chapters in this book, and I think this is one of them, where she talks about the honorable harvest. And this essentially comes from indigenous knowledge and wisdom. I know that I don't believe I have any indigenous blood in me, but I know that when I was growing up and we would go out and pick leeks or go out and harvest mushrooms, my father was always very careful about saying, don't take them all. He never said never take more than half. But the concept of you have to leave something for others, whether those others are human or non-human, you can't take everything. So these, I'm gonna leave these up for a while because I think this is really a fantastic way of looking at our, how we conduct our lives. Now, she has a very, funny in a way, but disturbing in a way, where she tries to apply these concepts when she goes to the mall to buy writing supplies and finds it virtually impossible. So it's nice to have this as an ambition, but practical application isn't always possible. Like I said, I think that, the concept of take only what is given, express your gratitude for what you have received, and reciprocate. It's as simple as that. I think another very poignant chapter in this first section where she talks about the grammar of animacy. And in this chapter, she seeks out some Potawatomi speakers because she wants to learn to speak her native language. Well, it turns out there are only 9 left who can speak Potawatomi. So she struggles. It's not easy, and she says, all I can do is, I feel like I'm talking to a dog and just barking commands. I have these, one word here, one word there. It's kindergarten level, but she's plugging away. She's working at it, and then she realizes that in this language, non-human living things, and that would include water, a lake, a rock, are not referred to as an it like we would do. They are granted personhood, and so she raises the idea of, how would we feel if we treated a plant as a person? Would we feel differently if we were killing that plant? Food for thought. This theme comes up in a couple stories down the road as well. So section 2 is about tending sweetgrass. There are more indigenous and personal stories that I think go to the idea that we need to nurture the human-plant, human-nature relationships. And then there's more on the themes of gratitude and reciprocity. I think in this section of the chapter that really spoke to me was the one where it is almost entirely about the Thanksgiving address. So the native culture is to thank, express gratitude and thanksgiving to Mother Earth, to the sun, to water, to fire, to the plants, to fish, to animals. And this, in the Onondagan language, the Thanksgiving address is called the words that come before all else. So you are raised to express gratitude and thanksgiving and appreciate what you've been given before you think about anything else. Which those are words maybe we could live by. So on page 107, she says, we have been given, so the Thanksgiving address includes this statement on page 107. We have been given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things. Section 3, picking sweetgrass. is, there are sections that continue emphasizing the themes of gifts from Mother Earth, community, expressing gratitude and reciprocity. It also introduces the idea of respect for and supporting each other. And I think all of these are expressed very nicely in the chapter about the three sisters. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the three sisters, corn, bean, and squash. So she draws a lot of, she starts with describing the shape of the seeds, which I thought was interesting. So the corn, golden, sort of triangle shaped, not much of a coating on it, if you will. Then the glossy speckled bean that sort of has, I forgot the scientific, Michael, you probably know it, name for it, but it essentially has a belly button. And which one of her students points out, does that bean have a belly? Why, yes, actually, because in the shell, it's attached with an umbilical cord to the, yeah, okay? And then the squash or pumpkin seed is like she describes it as an oval china plate crimped at the edges like a pie. Wonderful, and I think that those descriptions kind of highlight how poetic she can be, how her writing can be very elegant and very, you know, she's clearly a very observant person. Then she goes, she talks about the three sisters' different growth strategies. The corn will germinate first because it doesn't take a lot to pop it out of the earth, and it grows theoretically, you know, I don't know, an inch a day or something like that. And meanwhile, the bean is throwing down, it has very shallow roots. So the bean is thinking about, I'm gonna plant my roots deeper because corn's gonna take all the water at the top of the ground. I gotta go deeper to get the water. So it's the next one to come up, and by the time the bean comes up, the corn is high enough that the bean, when it starts to, this was a, did I hear? Yeah, this is a new word to me. I loved how I mean, I learned a lot from this book, from a scientific standpoint. Circumnutating. So that's when a bean, yeah, when a bean stalk comes up, it throws out the first few leaves, and then the tendril comes up, and it's circling around, trying to find something vertical that it can start to climb. That's a great word. And then the late bloomer is the squash, and it's not going to compete with the first two sisters. It's the late bloomer. It's going to crawl all over the ground, and it's got the big umbrella-shaped leaves and little prickly things on the bottom of the leaves and the vines, which are going to keep the critters off it as it's going around the ground. And by the way, those umbrella leaves are going to keep the moisture in for the corn and the beans. So it's all very kind of, you know, mutual respect for each other and symbiotic in a way. But she does say, it's tempting to imagine that these three are deliberate in working together, and perhaps they are. But the beauty of the partnership is that each plant does what it does in order to increase its own growth. But as it happens, when individuals flourish, so does the whole. And then she transitions to how it's important for each of us to know what our unique gift is and how we can use it in the world. And that individuality should be cherished and nurtured, because in order for the whole to flourish, each of us has to be strong and carry our own gifts. She describes one of her students who was an art student. She would start a Three Sisters garden and then take the students out there, and this art student stood back and said, "It's just like my art teacher described the elements of unity, balance, and color, and there's the vertical element, the squash is horizontal, and it's tied together with the lines of the bean vine." And then she goes, "Ravishing." That was wonderful. Yeah. So, all right. There's also a chapter here on black ash baskets. So here's a picture of one, and often there you can see the Sweetgrass integrated with the black ash. So the chapter is wonderful. It describes how, she's trying to learn how to make baskets. Easier said than done. Again, one of our sad stories, the fact that the emerald ash borer is destroying the trees from which these are made. But I think here's another example of the lessons of 3. When she's making the basket, the first 2 rows are the hardest. They keep, you have to weave in and out, so they're kind of going against each other. It isn't until the 3rd row comes in that everything is kind of held together. So she uses that metaphor to say that maybe we can apply this in our way of living. The first row should be the ecological well-being of all and the laws of nature, and without that we can't go to the 2nd row, which is dealing with human needs and economy. And then that 3rd row she brings in the ideas of respect, reciprocity, and relationships again. So I think, usually there's some question and answer, right? I mean, like discussion questions. So I think I'll just focus on a couple more sections, because again, she's exploring through these indigenous stories, her personal experiences, and Western science. She's exploring these ideas of gratitude and reciprocity. She does question, there's a wonderful, in the Braiding Sweetgrass section, there's a wonderful story called Sitting in a Circle, in which she talks about taking her ethnobotany students to Syracuse. ESF has a biological field station in the Adirondacks, Cranberry Lake, and it's a graduation requirement. They have to go there for 5 weeks, and there's no cell coverage. This one guy is just about dying. She takes them to a marsh where they build a wigwam. They harvest the stalks of the cattails. They harvest the pith to eat. They harvest pollen from the, cattails have the male and then the female down here. The pollen comes off the male. They harvest it in a paper bag and make pancakes with it. The female you could boil and eat like corn on the cob, which I've done. It's pretty good. And wonderful. And one of the students says, said, yeah, it was like going to Walmart. That's beautiful. Yeah. There's some pretty funny stories when the students get involved. But so the last section, burning Sweetgrass, she starts talking about the Wendigo, which is she says, quote, the Ojibwe boogeyman was used to scare children into not doing bad things, not because a Wendigo could eat them. So she uses that to make a parallel with the greedy nature of mankind, but then she also gives us some guidance on how we can heal our relationship with the land. So this is where there's a chapter, The Sacred and the Superfund, which goes in great detail about Onondaga Lake, which is such a travesty. It's really unbelievable, and to think that, I mean, it was the origin of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and I don't know if you noticed, I did bring a little sprig of white pine there, represent the 5 nations, the 5 leaves on the white pine, and it was a sacred tree. But to think that, you know, it went from that such a meaningful place, because the Onondagans were the core of the Confederacy, because that's where the peacemaker came from. And to think of what happened to it in the, you know, industrial age, really just, her descriptions just are awful. But
Like trashing the Vatican.
trashing the Vatican.
Yeah.
That's close to it.
That's close to it, really, really. But she makes a point. She says on page 327, we are deluged by information regarding our destruction of the world, and hear almost nothing about how to nurture it. And so she says it gives environmentalism, kind of a bad name. You know, you're all doomsayers. Why aren't we told something positive we can do? You know, let's kind of change the picture here. And she says despair is paralyzing. You can't just start crying. You have to turn it around. You have to look at ways that we can heal this broken relationship. So her antidote is ecological restoration. And in one, you know, someone asked, what can I as an individual do? And I love this. Rayanne, we gotta bring this quote, Jan, to the master garden. Plant a garden. Yeah, I mean, how many people, there's students again. She's talking about the 3 sisters, and she's explaining how the squash comes from it's developed, it starts as a flower. She goes, what? I never knew squash came from a flower. Yeah, and then they split the squash over, so it was a butternut squash. She said, oh, I love that squash. We always have it for Thanksgiving. I love that squash. Split it open, and there are all the seeds. And Dr. Kimmerer said, well, they're the eggs. You know, the squash is essentially ovaries. And the student's like, blech, I'm never eating squash. It's great. Yeah. So I'll end with a quote from one of the last chapters, which is defeating Wendigo, defeating this concept of greediness and over-exploitation and so forth. Creating alternatives to destructive economic structures is not enough. It is not just changes in policies that we need, but also changes to the heart. And that, in my, I mean, how do we do that? Where do we start with that?
You have to show people that there's joy in that. There's joy and wonder in the world, and that you have to treat it with kindness because, or care. Both of them are one and the same.
Well, what do you think in her idea of expressing gratitude? What do you think our gift, humankind, what do you think we can give back to express our gratitude for what Mother Earth has provided for us?
Plant native plants instead of all the ones we import from all over the world. There's beautiful native plants we can plant. We don't have
Throw
to-
away every damn chemical that comes near you.
She did pose this question in one of her classes, I think it was the Walmarsh class. And it was interesting, they came up with a list of, I'm gonna join Audubon Society, I'm gonna vote. I think the idea here is that it's defeatist to say, I can't, I'm just one person. I think that's wrong. At the very least, you could plant a garden.
Quit killing dandelions. The bees need them.
Don't pick them up.
Eat the dandelions and leave some for the bees.
So she, obviously, these are thoughts and questions she's had mulled over herself, and she decides for herself that one thing humankind has is the gift of language, and she feels that what she can give back is her writing. So obviously this book has been a huge, surprising to the publisher success. It's been used as, I think they call it like the first read, for colleges and universities where the freshmen coming in are required, many have required reading this book. And if you think about it, these books are generally chosen because there's a scientific grounding in them, there's history, there's culture, there's language, there are, a number of different disciplines that can use it to study.
And it's storytelling. People relate to things if you tell them a story.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden start teaching children about this a lot more.
Julia,
I agree.
I have the adaptation of that book.
For
It's
children?
written for young adults.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. So it should start way before college.
You got it. And
I-
start reading this year.
This has been fun reading.
Yeah. I will have to take a look at that because yeah.
What library from? It's from the Lockport Library.
Okay. So, one question I had is in this concept of the honorable harvest, do you think that we can address environmental concerns by applying these concepts? As her practical application in the mall pointed out, probably, I don't know.
Cool. If you haven't read it, it's a terrific read. It's great because you can pick it up and read anywhere in it and get a lot out of it.
Yes.
So we have, 2 copies, I believe?
There are 2 up here.
Checking out today, you could go home with that. All right. Julia?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, right.
I hope
I think it's a definite must read for everybody, so. Let's see, we have a couple of bookkeeping things we have to give away the
Yeah.
prize. We got a huge crowd here. You're quite a draw. Wow, all right.
So, yes, thank you, Julia. That was wonderful. I'm sure she'd be happy to answer any questions. I apologize, my voice is a little off. So I just did want to thank my wonderful committee. They are wonderful, as I just said, but they're just great, and I appreciate them. They keep this whole program going. And then I also wanted to thank our friends at the library because they do sponsor all of these programs. So if you're interested in learning more about the Friends, we have little membership brochures over here, and they are a wonderful organization. We have a few friends here, so I know they would also be happy to answer any questions. Next week, we're going to hear from Ron Trzynowski. He's going to share about the escape artist, and different topic, but equally as important. So I hope you'll join us for that. We'll have another door prize, and do you want to have Julia, did you put in?
Go ahead now, mix them up. Now, don't. There you go. It's like tilling the soil.
What you all really came for.
All right. Bonnie?
Bonnie Dito. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
All right, so next week's, I think we're all set. Thank you for coming. Please help yourself to everything so it's gone. And have a wonderful day.